like a soundbite. The Federal Reserve System is a scam. I see a lot of you know all this already. See, I knew I would be wasting my time. Well, it is a scam. It's a means of, for those of you who may wonder what I mean when I say a scam, it's a means of legalized plunder. It's a means by which the banking industry in America back in 1910 to 1913, actually 1913 is when the Federal Reserve Act was passed into law, so that's the historic date. On that date, a banking cartel was formed, and it's no different than a oil cartel or banana cartel. It's just a banking cartel. And they decided on that historic moment to quit competing with each other. Prior to that date in general, they were pretty much competing. The big banks were competing with each other to dominate the markets of the world. And they were very competitive and very cutthroat, you might say. And there was blood all over the battlefield in the financial markets in Wall Street and Paris and London and so forth. And so this was the era of the dawning of the cartel and the arrival of monopolies in the economies of the world. That's how some historians refer to that period of time, a window of about 50 years. And even some textbooks have this heading, the dawning of the cartel. And that happened precisely at this moment in history back in 1913. And so it happened in banking, and the bankers decided, like the industrialists, like the Carnegies and the Rockefellers, and by the way, the Rockefellers were very much involved in this banking industry by that time. They decided that, as John D. Rockefeller is quoted so many times by his biographers, he says, competition is a sin. Well, that's how he came to power, of course, through competition, very cutthroat in a way, but still it was what allowed these tycoons to rise to the top. They had to provide a better service or a better product at a lower price. They had to compete like heck with each other, and that's how they became as powerful as they did. But once they got to the top of the heap, they decided competition was now a sin because others might knock them off the top, you see. So that's when they got wise, in their sense wise, and they started to form into cartels, and they decided that the best thing for a cartel, what it needed to do to survive, is to go into partnership with governments. You may have noticed that every cartel in the world either has a very close relationship with governments or is working hard to create one. Because if you think for a minute, a cartel is simply an agreement between large corporations, an agreement to not compete, to protect their markets, to form partnerships for contracts and agreements on products, patents and products and prices and regions and marketing. You get North America, I get South America, you build cars, I build tractors and so forth, but we won't compete. And you find this everywhere in the world today, especially in our country. And Jason mentioned the pharmaceutical industry. I couldn't think of a better example of a cartel than that, unless it's the banking cartel. But everywhere you look, you see cartels around this. The healthcare industry is hoping to become a cartel. It already is, but it wants to solidify its power. So everywhere you look, you see cartels, and this is what happened in the banking industry. They decided to quit competing, and they formed a cartel, and they drafted up this very elaborate instruction manual or agreement between these major banking institutions. They did this on a place called Jekyll Island, off the coast of Georgia, a resort island. In those days, also today too, you can visit it today. Now it's owned by the state of Georgia. But in those days, it was privately owned by a small group of bankers and industrial tycoons like J.P. Morgan and John D. Rockefeller, their business associates. And that's where they went to create this cartel agreement. And when they finished it, they came back to the United States, and one of those men, by the way, was Nelson Aldrich, Senator Nelson Aldrich, who was the head of the banking committee in Congress, to draft legislation to propose, quote, reform in banking, you know. And whenever you hear the word reform coming out of a politician's mouth, you should automatically get an eraser and replace the word with conniving or scheming or crooked deal of some kind. And that certainly was true in this case. So the reform was to take all of the banking of America and bring it into the power of a cartel. So what they did is they wrote this cartel agreement and how to protect their markets, how to control interest rates without competition, how to limit the entry into the market for new upstart banks, keep them down, keep them controlled in the name of helping the people. And so they created a cartel, and then they took it to Washington, and they took that eraser I was talking about, and they erased the word cartel from the top of the paper, and they wrote in Federal Reserve Act, and it was passed into law. A cartel agreement was passed into law. So now, you and I have to abide by the terms of a private cartel agreement, or we go to prison. And that is why so many people think that the Federal Reserve System is a government agency, because who could put you in prison? Only government, right? And so what we find is that if you dig down deeply enough, this cartel is actually a hybrid organization which has brought into its ranks partners. It brought the politicians into it, and all cartels do that, because they need government to protect the cartel. Because otherwise, just imagine some oil cartel, and let's say Mexico decides, as it often has done, that it needs to break out of the cartel or break the oil agreements with other countries because they want money. They want a bigger share of the oil market than they now have by the cartel agreement. And so they decide arbitrarily they're going to just lower their prices and be more competitive. So what do the other countries do about it? They can't do anything about it. I mean, after all, it's a sovereign nation, right? Unless, of course, unless you get an international agreement with the United Nations or have some trade agreement and you disguise your cartel agreement as though it's a treaty, now you have the force and effect of international law. And you can send in blue helmets if necessary. All cartels do that with their local governments because they need the local police forces and they need the local armies to enforce the cartel agreement. Now this is reality. This is reality. And that's what I discovered. And every time I came across something like that, I'm a young guy going through this, it knocked me off my chair because I had this faith in the free enterprise system. I thought it was still here, you know. I remember that I was reading all these wonderful things about free market competition. I thought it's a good thing America has that. I never realized America had lost it. I was in the process of losing it way back in 1910. So anyway, in a short summary, that's it. We have this Federal Reserve System is a banking cartel that's gone into partnership with the federal government. And not only does it control all banking and all interest rates, but it was given the power to issue the nation's money. Mm-hmm. Now that is a strictly sovereign power. It's usually reserved only to nations. And so these congressmen, some of them out of ignorance, some of them out of avarice and greed, because they were definitely financially rewarded for doing this, they passed a law which took the power to issue money from Congress and gave it to the banking cartel called the Federal Reserve System. And ever since then, all of the money issued in this country is issued by the banks. And most people don't know that, because it says United States on it. Well, it was done in the United States, but not by the United States. It was done by the Federal Reserve System, which, when you analyze it, is a banking cartel. Now, this partnership between the banks and the politicians is pretty shrewd, because the bankers knew at the very start that this system was going to cause problems. It was going to crash. It was going to fail. It was going to go bankrupt, because you cannot just increase the money supply forever and ever and ever without some kind of repercussions. And especially when the cartel was given this power, along with that power was the legality of not keeping your promise. banks do not like to keep their promise. They promise, for example, when you put your money into the bank as a deposit, usually call it a demand deposit, the word demand implies that you can demand it back. It's your money, right? So I give it to the bank, bank's going to keep safekeeping, I get to write checks on it, but it's my money, and every time I want it, I can go in and get it. I can demand it, and they have to give it back to me. And everybody still thinks that's the way it works. Well, that's not the way it really is. They'll give it back to you if they wish. If you read the fine print, and you go back and read the Federal Reserve Act, and all of the rules and regs that go around that, you find out that they do not have to give you that money if they don't want to. If they're having a cash crunch, for example. If everybody's asking for their money at once, they can't even come close to giving it back to you. And so they have these clauses built into it, so it's legal for them not to do so. And now, of course, with the latest trend toward what they call a bail-in rather than a bail-out, the governments of the world have agreed, or in the process now of agreeing, to legalize the fact that the money really doesn't belong to you anyway. The new laws being written as we speak state that when you put money into the bank, you are investing it in the bank, like buying stock. So it's not yours anymore. You gave it to the bank, and they gave you a checkbook and a piece of paper with lots of fine print, which you never read, but legally now that money belongs to them. And so when they, not if, when they reach a point where they need more money because they have made bad investments and they have bad loans, now they just go to your deposit and say, well, too bad, we need this money and you invested in our firm, so we're having a downturn. Just like investing in a corporation, the value of your stock goes down when the corporate income goes down. So that's what's happening in banking, and as I say, it's a scam. And it's a wonderful, beautifully created scam. Most people have no idea that this is going on. They think that banks are very trustworthy, when in fact they're some of the most corrupt business structures in the world. And they have always been that way. But they go to great lengths to make it appear that they're very honest and open, and they have, they all wear suits when you walk in there, and the ladies are all dressed up. And by the way, the ones you meet in Bank of America are not, I'm not talking about them, I'm talking about the ones up at the top. The presidents of these giant corporations are in on it. The Federal Reserve Board, they're all in on it, and so forth. But the people down there that are taking your money at the teller window have no idea. In fact, I got a kick out of it. It was a couple of years ago. I was talking to somebody at my local bank about an account and how I got to transfer from one place to another. And they said, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, I'm a writer." "Oh, what do you write about?" I said, "Oh, boy, here we go." I write about banking. "Oh, really? What do you write about?" "Oh, well, I write about the Federal Reserve," and then they got the blank look. "What is that?" And I started to explain. I said some of the things I had just said, not quite so bluntly, but likely. And they got very interested. They said, "That's interesting. I didn't know about that." And this is what I discovered, that even people up in middle management in banking today had no idea about this history or this function of the Federal Reserve System. Well, that's my short version. I could go on for days on this topic. It just gets worse the further you go. You get the idea. And probably as investors in real estate, you need to know this. So I didn't really intend to talk about this, but you see what happens in the last 30 seconds. So that's my short version of it, and I'd be happy later on, if you have questions, to go into some of the details. I'd be happy to discuss it with you. But I got to thinking on my way over here last